Good morning, Iowa. From the Five Talents Financial Management Group studios, I'm Scott Casper. Nick Learhoff has the week off. Welcome to St. Gregory's Talk Therapy, the mental health show. We invite you to join us as we talk about a topic that many Iowans face every day, and that's mental illness. We feature the expertise of doctors, therapists, and specialists who understand the challenges that we face. And as a reminder, our show airs 2 times, 4 a.m. and 10 a.m. Saturday mornings on Iowa's Hope 940 and online at talktherapytmhs.com. Join in for the conversation on this very important life topic. As we say, and we like to say it, Iowa, we're listening. It is National Grief Awareness Month for Children, so it's National Children's Grief Awareness Month. Just yesterday was the day. If there was a day in the point, that was it. But we are talking about it because it is and I think it's more than just a month, but at least it gives us an opportunity to really speak to it and talk to the experts, people that will give us a little more insight into this and why it's so important to talk about. The National Alliance for Grieving Children is committed to serving as a catalyst for leading a national movement to educate, advocate, and raise awareness about the needs of grieving children, teens, and their families. It's huge. This November, this month, is Observance of Children's Grief Awareness Month. We will launch NAGC, they said. It's called Grief Talk. Grief Talk is an initiative of the NAGC aimed at encouraging and supporting honest conversations around the topics of death and grief. The initiative has produced resource guides, and you'll find out more about that at childrengrieve.org. Again, childrengrieve.org. Here to talk about this and the overall important topic of mental illness that we face here in the state of Iowa is a returning guest. Somebody has a bit of radio background herself, Buffy Peters of Hamilton's Grief Academy. Buffy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Scott. I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm super pumped you're here, and thanks again for the follow-up and the follow-through on this. Give us a brief overview of our topic today from your chair.
Yeah, so I was so excited that you wanted to meet again because we know that grieving children and teens is a very big deal. And so when we were talking about maybe topics we wanted to cover, this was perfect since it is National Children's Grief Awareness Month. And we are a part of the National Alliance for Grieving Children. And I was actually one of the people that worked on one of the resource guides. And so the one that just launched this week is about how do you talk to kids about end-of-life rituals and how do you prepare them for funerals and those different types of rituals, celebration of life. And also with COVID-19 and the pandemic, how has that changed and how we can really prepare them going in and incorporating them. We work at Hamilton's Academy of Grief and Loss a lot with kids and teens. And so we know how important it is to talk about that. Back in the day, not a lot of people really realize that kids grieve. They think kids are resilient. They don't need that support. And we just know that they grieve different. Kids grieve in pockets. And so you might say, honey, I have to talk to you about something really sad. Grandma died. And they might ask a couple questions and say, you know what? Can I go play now? And so for us adults who are actively grieving, we're just like, okay, are they okay? Like, is this okay? And it is. That's how they grieve and process. And then they'll come back and ask more questions, go play. So they're really good at decompartmentalizing their grief. And so they can kind of do that. And so the National Alliance for Grieving Children, we talk a lot about how do we support those grieving kids? How do we support grieving teens in ways that work for them, knowing that they do grieve different than us adults? And so that's just raising that awareness. And as a kid who had her grandma die at 10, I see the importance of really wanting to make sure that those kids are supported. And so that's kind of what the initiative speaks to.
You know, I can, and you brought up your grandmother. I can recall when my grandfather died, nobody really talked to us kids about it. It was just, I'm sure they were grieving, but my parents really never talked about it.
Yep.
And it's so important that we have this dialogue with kids and with each other, I would think. You mentioned compartmentalizing.
Mhm.
Can you talk to us about that? Tell us what that means.
Yeah. So what happens with kids is they can only retain so much information as well. And so they take it and then they need time to process and they come back. And kids really do grieve a lot and express their grief in play. And so that's part of it. And one of the things we get a lot is people will call and say, okay, I've got my 4-year-old whose dad died. One, how do I talk to them about that in language that they understand? And two, they're in preschool playing out the funeral or playing out how they died. And those poor preschool teachers are like, oh, is this normal? Is this okay? And so knowing that kids do grieve differently like that, that they really do act out their grief in play, and they just need different outlets. They need more creative outlets and how we can support them with that. And so they can go and kind of forget about it, if you will, for a minute. They're just processing it different. And so that I think that's important for us adults to know because it's been a few years since we've been kids.
Sure,
And
sure.
if you didn't have that experience of grieving as a child, you may not fully understand that. And like you said too, Scott, after my grandma died, we never talked about her again. And so I was left to try to figure out how do I process this grief that I'm feeling because I feel like I'm not supposed to feel this way because no one's talking about it. And so that's a lot of it too, is opening up that conversation.
Hmm.
And a lot of people think, oh, well, a 3.5-year-old, they don't really understand. When they do, if we can explain it in ways, but they're not going to understand the finality of death. They're going to come back and keep asking, well, but is grandpa coming back today? Because they want to see is the question, are you going to answer it the same?
Right.
Has it changed? It's kind of that magical thinking, and they're just processing it different. And I think the other thing that people don't realize with kids and teens when they've had somebody significant in their life die is that they grieve that at each developmental milestone. And so I'm excited to talk with Sally later because she can kind of speak to that of being a young child when her dad died, to being now a teenager and processing the information in a different way. And so that's the thing too, is that we'll get calls that my son's mom died when he was 4. He's now 8. He's having a lot of trouble in school and is really actively grieving for his mom. Is that normal? Absolutely. That's how kids grieve. And we do it as adults too. If you think about people who have been significant in your life that has
Right.
died, when those different milestones show up, you miss them again. That grief resurges. And that's totally normal because we know that grief doesn't end when someone dies.
It's
It
actually
does
healthy, right?
it is completely healthy. It is 110% adaptive to continue the bond we have with our person and to grieve for them. It does change over time, though. And so, our active grieving when we first find out someone has died versus 10, 15, 20 years later, there's still going to be those times that that grief resurges. Look at right now with the holidays, there's a lot of people that feel that grief kind of coming back up, and that's totally normal for that to happen.
I was at a funeral yesterday, and I got there early in the family. I mean, there was a lot of setup going on, and I knew it was going to be a big funeral, so I chose to go early
Yeah.
so I could grieve privately
Mhm.
and show my respect to our dearly departed.
Yeah.
Grief, it's said, and I think John Green said this, grief does not change you, it reveals you. What does that say? I mean, really,
Yeah.
what does that say?
Well, I think it reveals you and the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear that a lot from people is the people I thought would be there for me were nowhere to be found because they were uncomfortable with that. But I think it shows a different part of you. I hear so often from parents who have a child die, people say to them, I don't know how you do this. I can't imagine when you can imagine if you wanted to, you could.
Right.
It's just our uncomfortability. You don't want to. And it shows a part of you that you never knew was there, that you can withstand something completely life altering, devastating, and you're still here. You're able to survive the unsurvivable in your mind, right? So I agree with that it does show you a part of yourself that you've never had to have. And I think any adversity shows you that. If you think about different mental illnesses, that shows a part of you that maybe you don't necessarily want to be depressed or have anxiety or anything like that, but it shows you that you can withstand that
Mm-hmm.
with the right support and the right thing, like right coping skills, that you can get through really anything life throws at you if you choose to take advantage of those different opportunities.
I mean, we are creatures of habit. That's part of the human condition, right?
Yep.
We are creatures of habit, and at least it is for me. Sometimes very difficult to imagine and navigate the change. I mean, let's face it, grief and grieving, at least from my chair, is that we are grieving the absence of somebody, the loss of somebody, but aren't we also grieving the fact that now we have to change? Life has changed. We are changing.
Yeah. Well, and those are those secondary losses.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have someone die, that's that primary loss. And of course, there's a lot of grief tied to that. But then we also have everything else that changes, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
As I tell people, that person coming into your life, their love changed you. And of course, when they die, that's going to change you too. And it doesn't feel good, obviously, but
Right.
I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. And back in the day, we were supposed to, forget about the person that's in the past. We thought that you were supposed to do that was what was healthy. Where we know now, like I said before, that it is adaptive, it is healthy to continue that bond. That love is always going to be there. So how can we find those ways to feel close to that love again and feel that our person kind of being there with us, right?
Right. Well, grief, it looks different for everybody, but the silver lining here, folks, is that you're not alone in the experience of it, okay? So that's part of our conversation today, and we're glad you're joining us here. The St. Gregory's Talk Therapy Mental Health Show will continue after our timeout, live from the Five Talents Financial Management Group studios. Scott Casper and our very special guest in studio, Buffy Peters of Hamilton's Grief Academy. More after this on Hope 940. Stay tuned.
St. Gregory's Talk Therapy, the mental health show, will continue after this commercial timeout.
I came to St. Gregory very reluctantly at my all-time worst, physically, emotionally, and mentally. But I gave my best effort to these new things in my life as I saw hope in this complete approach. I'm at the point now that I feel my strongest and best ever, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I felt quite certain God was orchestrating everything.
St. Gregory Recovery Center. Recovery starts here. RelevantRadio.com/St. Gregory.
All right, welcome back to the show. It is St. Gregory's Talk Therapy, the mental health show. Scott Casper with you this morning. My special guest in studio is Buffy Peters of Hamilton's Grief Academy. And you perhaps don't know about Hamilton's Grief Academy. Let me tell you something. This is a feature that Hamilton's offer. It's a service. It's a wonderful extension of who we are. It's a way for you to really understand what grief is and the grieving process. But Hamilton's takes it one step further. They have a great staff. They have incredible resources, and perhaps you can find out more online. Buffy, give them the website address for Hamilton's.
Yes, it's Hamilton's with an S, hamiltonsfuneralhome.com. And there is a ton of really good information on there. We have COVID-specific resources.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of printable handouts. So if you're wondering, well, how do I talk to kids about death, cremation, suicide, overdose, all these different difficult topics, we have printable handouts right on there. We also have information about the holidays. We have a video on there. You can request a grief care packet if you would like to, if you're struggling these holidays of how do I incorporate my person still in our holiday traditions? How do we have that conversation with our family? Because it's hard. So yes, please visit our website, hamiltonsfuneralhome.com. That's got a lot of really great information that's at your fingertips. You can print things out, email it to people if you know somebody that can utilize that. So please definitely check that out.
All right. So during the break, I suggested that perhaps we take a look at the stages of grief, and there is, let's face it, and it's not always easily identifiable. Okay. Whatever stage of the grieving process you're in, there are people around you who have all been through tough times and have offered their own wisdoms to help you feel less alone. Well, I agree, because that's one thing we don't want, is we don't want each other to feel bad.
Right.
I don't care what anybody says. Because we're then uncomfortable, right?
Yep.
But
even me.
yeah,
Even
I can't
me.
imagine you
Yeah.
though, because you're so
I know.
always so upbeat.
I know. So I have to tell you, Scott, recently it's been very difficult. I've had quite a few people that I love and care about that have had really significant losses in their life. And I even find myself thinking, what can I do? I need to do something to fix it, right? And I know, as a professional working with grieving people, there is nothing that I can do to fix it. The only thing I could do to fix it is bring that person back. And I do not have that power,
Not
right?
yet.
Not yet.
Not
Who
yet.
knows?
We're working on it.
Who knows? But I know that, even me knowing that in my heart of hearts, all it aches to do is to fix it. And so know that if that's your innate thing, that's because you're a compassionate, loving person, and it's human nature. We don't want people to hurt.
Right.
The people we love and care about, we don't want them to hurt. But we know that grief is the natural and normal reaction to any loss. And so whether that is the death of someone, which obviously causes a lot of grief, or somebody loses their job, or, there's all these other changes in our lives that also cause grief. And so I'd like people to know that, because I think we have to cut ourselves some slack
Sure.
and be a little bit easy on ourselves, and especially in a time during a global pandemic. And just knowing that it is the natural and normal reaction to that loss. And when we talk about stages of grief, I like to think of it more, we have that initial impact of when we find out the person dies. And that's when we're feeling numb, we're shocked. Our brain cannot comprehend what just happened. We have to slowly let that kind of stuff sink in, right? And then we have that intense period of grieving where we're trying to figure out, what in the heck are we supposed to do with the rest of our lives? Like, how am I supposed to actually live without that person?
In other words, how do we carry on?
How do we carry on, right? Where we decide, am I going to let life drag me behind, kicking and screaming because I'm still clinging to my person is gone and I don't know what to do? Or do we decide, with support, with our coping skills, how do we pick back up and continue our life in honor of our person? I think that's the biggest honor we can do, is when we continue to live our life in a way that they would be proud of. And there certainly are common themes. And, the 5 stages of grief was something that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had brought out in context of when people are in the process of dying. And it was never really meant to be for this. We'll go ahead and slap it on grief, because we want it to be neat and tidy. We want to think there's 5 stages, we get through it, and then all of a sudden we're back to normal and we're okay and it's over, right? There's something very appealing about that. And I don't want to say like, hey, sorry guys, you're always going to be grieving for your person. One, that's the reality, but 2, it does change. And that doesn't mean that there's no hope, or that you're going to always feel as terrible as you feel that first day when you find out, or that first week or month or year. It changes.
Right.
And if you don't feel it changing over a certain amount of time, that might be the time where we can get that additional support. You might benefit from some one-on-one counseling, different things like that to really help yourself process that. But I always tell people, if that model helps you and you find comfort in it, great. Take what works for you, but take what doesn't, like, just leave that over there. And just like you said, Scott, everybody grieves different. And just because what worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And so don't be hard on yourself. I say that from personal experience. I know I shared with you last time about my best friend dying when I was in college.
Right.
I beat myself up because my grief didn't behave as I thought it should. I thought it was supposed to be, okay, so I go through anger, I go to bargaining, I go through these stages, and here I am, however many months or years later, still struggling with the death of my best friend, and people telling me I should be over this by now. And so I say that if you're in that position that you feel like my grief isn't fitting into that, that's just one model. There are a ton of grief theories. So find the one that works for you. And one that we've found that's been really helpful is kind of this idea of our grief oscillating. And so we have kind of the grief work, right? We have to do the stuff. We have to think about the grief. We have to do
That's
all
the
of that,
work,
right?
right?
And then we have the time where we need a break. And that break allows us to do the hard work of grief. And so that break may be, I'm going to go to a movie with a friend. Well, pre-pandemic, I'm going to watch a really funny movie that kind of gets my mind off of things. It's okay to take a break from your grief. It's okay to feel that joy of that funny cat video on YouTube that I always go to, because that gives me a minute where I don't have to feel the immense weight of the pain and the grief that I'm feeling right now. So that kind of can be helpful to let people know, like, you can feel joy. You can laugh again. You're
Right.
not, disrespecting your person or, dishonoring them in any sort of way. We do have to continue to live our life. That's the difficult reality of grief. Like, our life ended when that person died. Yet somehow we have to find in ourselves to keep going. And that's difficult.
And it's the will to carry on.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky said that the darker the night, the brighter the stars, the deeper the grief, the closer is God. What role does God or spirituality, faith, play in the grieving process?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that either go one way or the other. If they had that deep faith, they may lean completely into it. There's others that have that faith and they're thinking, okay, so why did my person die? I've been a good this, that. I followed the rules. Why did my person die? And so I like people to know that it's completely normal, however you're feeling. If you're questioning or you have anger towards, a higher power, or you're totally leaning into it, that's part of your process. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think people need to understand that those feelings that are difficult to feel, like if we feel a lot of guilt or shame associated with our person dying, that if we never express that, or if I tell you, Scott, that I feel really guilty that my person died,
Right.
and you say to me, because you're a loving and caring person, but Buffy, you shouldn't feel that way. That seems like a caring response, right? You don't want me to feel that way. But I know that that's part of that person's grief and they have to feel that.
Does it diminish by saying that or putting words to that emotion? Does it diminish the other person's feelings?
Yep.
At all?
Yep. It tells me that feeling is wrong for me to feel, and now I can't talk to you about
So
it.
it's
And
not
maybe
valid.
it's not valid. Where we know that any feeling that people feel is valid. And so what I would say to that is, you know what? That makes a lot of sense to me that you would feel that way. Tell me more about that. And you're allowing them to help start processing those difficult emotions instead of shutting it down.
This is an amazing time in our lives. It truly is, because of the COVID and the nature of COVID. Number of hospitalizations is through the roof. We are setting records every day.
Yep.
It's almost a race to the finish, if you will. And that finish line is going to be clouded somewhat by the vaccines that will be coming out very soon. I understand they're looking for emergency approval and to get that product out to the very needing public. But it's a time that many of us are very afraid, very afraid.
Yep.
And C.S. Lewis said it best: no one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. And that's what, we fear change. We fear that which we can't control. And a panacea is the face mask, in my opinion. Okay. I think it does a job. I do, but it's not the end all be all. You have to still be smart. You still have to be careful. You still have to be respectful of each other. While it may be a hassle to wear a face mask, it also is offering some comfort. Yep. Well, Hamilton's does a great job in offering comfort to those folks that desperately need it, kids included. And it is that month where we are, and I hesitate to use the word celebrate because I don't know that that's the correct term, but we do recognize in a big way the grief that kids are going through. Okay, it's National Children's Grief Awareness Month. Scott Casper with you here in the Five Talents Financial Management Group studios for the St. Gregory's Talk Therapy Show. It's the mental health show, and our in-studio guest from Hamilton's Grief Academy is Buffy Peters. We're going to take a quick time out. I do want to let you know, too, that we have a special guest coming up, and she is Saley Sims. She's about 17 years old now, and it was in 2001, I do believe, that she lost her father. Does that sound right?
It might have been 2003. We'll get the actual dates from her.
Well, now that you say that, I deal with a lot of dates in my head, and they all are confusing. Mm-hmm. So do me a favor, folks. Grab a second cup of coffee or a cup of hot tea or whatever it is you're enjoying, and just sit back and listen. Internalize what is being expressed here on the show today with our expert, Buffy Peters. I'm going to be you. I'm going to ask those questions and see if we can get down to offering up some more facts on how to better live our lives. We're Talk Therapy, the mental health show, brought to you by our friends, where? St. Gregory's. You bet. St. Gregory's will help you. They've helped me, and they've helped my family, and they can do the same for you. Look for them online at St. Gregory's. We'll be back after this. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. There's more with Nick Learhoff and Scott Casper right here on Iowa's 940 for St. Gregory's Talk Therapy, the mental health show. Iowa, we're listening.
The folks at St. Gregory were vital in helping me to get my brother into rehab. They were not only supportive of him, but of our whole family. They truly saved all of our lives with their love and kindness. Because of the hard work they helped my brother do, we regained a valued, healthy, and incredible part of our family. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
RelevantRadio.com/St. Gregory, setting the new standard for recovery.
Hello again, everybody. It is Scott Casper. This is St. Gregory's Talk Therapy, the mental health show. Nick has the week off, sitting in his chair, the very able and positive, my goodness sake, she's positive, Buffy Peters of Hamilton's Grief Academy. And Buffy, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, so we have these wonderful off-air conversations, and they're hard to recap, but one of the things that you mentioned was the child bereavement estimation model. Yep. Talk to us about what that is in brief.
Yes, it's a mouthful, but the child bereavement estimation model is something that Judy's House, which is a grief center in Denver, Colorado, that they made. And basically what it does is it tells you, based on data of kids that they know that are grieving, how many kids by the time 18 rolls around, how many kids will be grieving the death of a parent or a sibling. And the national average is 1 in 14. So if you think about like kids in a classroom, that's at least 2 kids that have a parent or sibling that has died that's grieving. That does not count the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the cousins, all these other people that are important in kids' life that have died. So we know that children's grief is a major issue.
It's huge.
Huge. And so I was very excited that we were able to have Saley come because she is 1 in 14 and she is very much more than just a statistic.
Right.
She's a wonderful young lady. But I think it's really important to hear from that perspective too, as we can say, like, I can tell you what it was like for me as a 10-year-old, but again, that was a few years ago. And so I really wanted to talk to...
Well, we changed.
Yeah.
The situation has changed. The world is constantly changing. The National Children's Grief Awareness Month is going on right now. It's through the month of November, and yesterday was the actual day. But here to talk about that, her experience in it, is the very, she's just a wonderful girl. Her name is Saley Sims. Good morning, Saley. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Say good morning to Buffy as well.
Good morning, Buffy.
Hi, Saley. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. It's good to hear your voice.
Yours too.
See, folks, you can hear it just around the edges. Very positive, very positive. You lost your father in 2003. How old were you?
I was about 1 when I lost him.
And when your father died at 1 year old, your grief, as we just mentioned, at 1 year old is going to look different today
Yes.
than it did at 1 year old. And I'm going to ask Buffy. Buffy, go ahead, because
Yeah.
this is the conversation you have with so many folks,
Yep.
and it's part of the process of living.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I've talked a lot with Saley just about, how that changes over time, right? And
Right.
I wanted to talk a little first. Saley, can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself? Because I think it's important to know, who are we talking to?
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Saley Sims. I'm 17. I go to school, but I'm homeschooled, so I do everything at home. I play basketball and soccer. I love to be around my family. And
you
I
have an
guess that's,
awesome family, don't you?
yes, they're pretty great.
Yes. So I actually work with Saley's mom at Hamilton's Funeral Home. She runs our pet cremation division or
Oh,
pet
wow.
services. And she is fantastic. And then Saley came on as a part-time person. So she helps out at funeral services, answering phones, all of that kind of stuff. And I've always been in awe of Saley and her mom, Sunita's, the way that they continue to honor Saley's dad. And it's just so cool to see a teenager so passionate about advocating for her parent who has died and not letting any stigma or shame get in the way of that. And I've already told Saley that, so I just wanted to fill the listeners in. So tell us a little bit about your dad.
Yeah. So, from him passing away at such a young age, there's not a lot that I remember of him, or being us being together. I don't really remember that. But I do have family, of course, that tells me all these memories. So he was a very funny guy. Loved to dance, loved to ski. Loved me, of course. So that's just, those memories, I guess, of him. That's just what I, will cherish forever, I guess. But
Well, okay.
Just a quick follow-up. Early, let's say 2003, 2004, and then beyond, does it get easier? And should people expect it to get easy?
I would say it definitely does get easier. There's some days where it's really, I guess it would, yes, it gets easier, but you're still going to have days that are you miss him, and some days are just always harder than others, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it changes over time, right?
Yeah.
And so, especially you being so young when your dad died, your memories are what people have told you.
Yes.
So you're kind of living that way vicariously through their memories. And so that has its own kind of thing with it too. And I think it's important for the listeners to know that your dad died from suicide. And often that kind of death does hold a lot of stigma and shame. And I'm so glad that your family has been so open with you about that, so that they've really taken that wall of stigma and shame down for you. And again, that's why I'm so proud of you, how you advocate for him to keep his memory alive and to not let that kind of stand in the way, because we know that people who die from suicide, it is because 90% have some sort of underlying mental health condition.
Right.
It's not like it's a rational choice. It's not like it's something they want to do to their family. It's because they have so much emotional pain that they're trying to end that pain and not their life. And so I think that that's what's really important for people to know. And actually, when this episode airs on Saturday, it is the International Suicide Survivors Day.
Wow.
So it was perfect when we thought about talking with Saley and honoring her dad, just to do it on that day. And if you're interested in that, now, if you're listening to the 10 o'clock recording, it has started, but there's an afternoon session. So just Google it, and there's lots of ones happening online. They're all happening online. So again, that was the International Suicide Survivors Day is Saturday. And so definitely take a look at that, because that's really important. So speaking of what Scott was kind of trying to allude to Saley, let's talk about how does your grief look now as a 17-year-old?
Yeah.
How does it look today? Well, not today, but today. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now.
So, my grief sometimes is, I take it out on anger. Sometimes I'm angry at him, for leaving, like, oh, that was such a selfish act. But, then I just had to put myself in like his shoes and like think like, he was in pain and he just wanted the pain to end. And, so I kind of just sometimes, I cry a lot, and that's okay. That's just, we're humans, and that's just how sometimes we grieve. Everyone grieves different, but from being so young when he passed, I don't really remember how grief was back then. But now it's definitely, I cry a lot. Sometimes I'm angry too at him. It's just kind of.
I cry too, Saley. I do.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine
Right.
to express your emotion at that time. When people ask you about your father, what do you say?
No, I'm super open about it. I just tell them, my father passed away when I was young. Depending on where the conversation is, I will tell them, how he passed away, and how it is, growing up, and like, growing up without a dad. So yeah, it kind of just really depends.
Deep grief, Elizabeth Gilbert said it, deep grief sometimes is almost like a very specific location, a coordinate, if you will, on a map of time. So when you're standing in the forest of sorrow, which we all do, okay? The forest of sorrow, whether you know it or not, you're either on the edge of it, in the middle of it, or coming out the other side, okay? But if someone can assure you that they themselves have stood in that very same spot and now moved on, sometimes that alone brings hope. But it's that shared experience, and that's part of the purpose of this show, is to have that conversation. Danny Bishop gets something out of each and every program that we do.
Oh, yeah.
And Danny, this is so common because, again, it's something we all deal with. So, large families. I can't imagine being a member of a large family.
Well, this is really surprising to me. My grandfather took his life. He was closer to the end of his life.
Yeah.
And I really wish I'd had somebody like you, Saley, to sit next to me at the funeral and explain to me, it was his pain. And how could I be so selfish as to ask him to spend one more day in this world? So I really wish I'd had somebody like you to help me through that.
That's powerful. Our guest, Haley, I keep saying Haley. Is that common? People want to call her Haley?
That is so common. It's so common. Saley, Bailey. Oh, I meant Haley, Bailey. Yeah.
Well, you don't want to hear what people confuse my name with. But Saley Sims is our guest online, but in studio is Buffy Peters. She's the director of Hamilton's Grief Academy. I should say the president, because she really is doing a great job of guiding the ship. And sometimes the waters are murky, sometimes they're choppy, and sometimes it's a downright huge storm that we have to experience. And sorrow, grief, and dealing with it is such a challenge. It truly is. We're going to ask you to stand by because we're going to take a quick time out, pay some bills. We'll be back on the other side. Our conversation will continue. Childrengrieve.org, childrengrieve.org, a great site to check out. It'll be listed on our resources page as well. But do me a favor, stand by. We'll be back. There's more after this on Hope 940. It's St. Gregory's Talk Therapy, the mental health show. Stay tuned.
Talk Therapy, the mental health show, is brought to you by St. Gregory's Recovery Center. St. Gregory's features individualized drug treatment programs with a personal and holistic approach. Enjoy private counseling in small groups attended by caring staff in beautiful and serene locales. St. Gregory's is evidence-based rehabilitation. Most insurance is accepted. Don't go it alone. Enjoy a high success rate with St. Gregory's Recovery Centers. St. Greg's, it's where science meets recovery. stgregory.com.
I can't say enough about the staff at St. Gregory's, who seem especially gifted to work in this field. They were so helpful and encouraging and will always have my gratitude. I made some very good new friends, a couple of whom I probably would not have made it through those beginning days without. Everyone and the programs at St. Gregory's seemed designed and placed in my life by God's perfect plan.
RelevantRadio.com/St. Gregory. RelevantRadio.com/St. Gregory.
Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak knits up the wrought heart, and it bids its break. William Shakespeare was trying to tell you in his Elizabethan terminology that if you speak, or there is power to speaking to something, right? Speaking to grief, not talking about it is where the damage occurs. Yep. My estimation, yours?
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the important thing, is that they're allowed to. But there's some people that if that doesn't work for you, don't feel like you have to go to a grief group and spill your guts out. Some people, that's super uncomfortable, and that's not who they are.
Makes it worse.
Yeah. And so then that's why it's so important to know what resources are available. Do you want to talk one-on-one with a counselor? Do you want to write down your feelings in a journal? Do you want to go online and watch, TED Talks and YouTube videos? There's so many ways that you can feel I am not alone. Maybe it's reading a book. There's different ways that you can get that experience without having to put yourself in a position that just doesn't speak to who you are. But I do think telling your story is so important, especially in the beginning, to be able to do that. And I think as a society, we need to get better about being uncomfortable. And if a global pandemic doesn't teach us that we are all vulnerable, we need to be able to be uncomfortable. And that's how we can be able to sit with those that are hurting. We're all hurting in some sort of way. And so if we can be there and just sit and listen and not be afraid that I have to say the right thing to fix it, right? There's nothing you can say to fix it. Like, just so you know, again, I try, but I don't even have the words. It's being there.
You having an amazing ability to talk about it, express yourself, and then relate because of your personal experiences, but seeing it daily. And then getting to see a bright, shining example of how positive or positivity can shine through. Saley is, I think, a perfect example of that. Saley Sims, our online guest. Saley, welcome back. Tell me, how is it on certain days it pops up something, a sight, a smell, a taste, conversation, a movie, a card. It doesn't matter. There's certain things that will bring up that memory, and it begins anew. Does it do the same for you?
Yeah, most definitely. Some days are harder than others. And sometimes when you have that smell or that movie, or you break down, and that's okay. That's just me. When I see, one of his pictures of us together or something like that, then it's just like, oh, I wish you were here, or,
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the cool things too, knowing Saley personally, is seeing how she expresses herself on social media. And that's something that's very big with, honestly, all of us right now. But to be able to get that connection that she can say, hey, Dad, I'm missing you. I wonder what it would be like if you were still here, kind of thing. She can really put that out there. And it's interesting because it's almost like you're putting it out to that person, even though you know that they can't see that. But then to get that affirmation back from people like her mom, people that she works with, her friends saying, how proud he'd be of the girl she is today, and wondering what that would be like. And so it's just so interesting to see that grief kind of turn that way too. And for her to have that, way to express herself and get that validation from other people, I think is really important. And again, she is actively, and that's the part of grief that makes it helpful, is when we can be active in that grief and we're doing something about it. And she is honoring and she is showing people that she's proud of who her dad was, regardless, right? Because we know that the moment of someone's death does not define their life. It doesn't. And
makes
so,
sense though, right?
yeah, and we think it does, especially those of us that are the survivors. That's what we're fiercely protective of, is that we don't want that moment of death to be the definition of their entire life. That's not. And so for Saley to be able to do that, and I think that really talks to Saley, what are the things that you do that you are really cognizant of continuing to honor your dad? What are those special things that you and your mom and your whole family, honestly, do to honor him?
Yes. Every September we go on the suicide walk, and we just it's just really great to just be there and just feel him close to us. We at the suicide walk, there's like a dove ceremony. They let doves go. You walk in memory of your loved one. You put flowers in the water for your loved one. So we do that every year. And on his birthday or death day, we go to Easter Lake where his ashes are spread, and we put a yellow rose in the water for him. And then we just, as a family, we just, just are together, and that makes us feel like he's there with us. So that's really, we do that every year too.
Saley Sims, our guest in the studio, is a great friend to the show and an outstanding resource for you folks. Did you ever think you'd become a resource?
I know.
And here you are, being a resource through Hamilton's Grief Academy. She's Buffy Peters. And Buffy, when I can't wait to see what the next topic is that you come up with. You're good. But we're talking about children and grieving, okay? And childrengrieve.org is a great resource tab for you folks. Check it out online as we come to you live this morning from the Five Talents Financial Management Studios. Nick Learhoff, I'm so upset that he's not here to have this conversation, because this is so right up his alley. Yep. But I'm lucky, and I think you folks at home are as well, that we get to have this conversation, because for so long we have allowed, we've made a conscious decision, most of it's conscious, I think, that if we don't talk about it, it really doesn't matter, and it didn't happen. Yep. Okay. Grief comes in many different forms. And I think you probably see the spectrum much more so than most people, because you deal with it not only in your work, but in your life.
Yep.
So tell me, if a parent is having trouble with a child, and they're noticing distinct changes in their behavior, their sleep patterns, their eating, and the parent comes to you saying, hey, we've got an issue. What can you do? How do you help these people?
We are getting more and more calls because of the pandemic, like more than ever before. And that's from adults and from about kids, because it is an increasingly difficult time. And the first thing that I do is I validate that of course they are struggling right now. I just talked to a dad whose son was 4 when mom died, and he's now 8, and he's really struggling in school. Well, probably too, the global pandemic's not helping that. And just really validating for him, you are doing a good job. You are getting him the help he needs. Just like Saley, this little boy is in counseling. And I think that's really important for kids too, is when they can have that one-on-one. And I know Saley can kind of speak to that, how helpful that was for her to be able to process that separate from her family.
Right.
It's great that they honor her dad all together, but sometimes then it feels like it's their grief and not my grief, and to be able to kind of separate that out. We will often send a grief care package that will have lots of resources about, do you want a one-on-one counselor? Here's a list of people we work with that we know work really well with grieving kids. Do you need some of those handouts? How do we talk to them about those things? So we really just make sure we give them all the resources and really let them know we're a support. Call us back. If there's a question they ask, we will help you answer that if you don't know the answer to that. And it's a lot about that validating and really being that support.
Saley, you found support through Hamilton's and Buffy, and what do you want to tell our listeners out there with the a few minutes that we have remaining in the program?
That if you lose a parent or any loved one, that I feel like memorying them or remembering them is helps me a lot. It helped me to, feel closer to them, and that it does get easier. It's still very hard, and you're always going to have your days, but grieving in any way you want, with laughing or angry or crying, that's totally okay. We all grieve, differently, and just know that your loved one loved you very much. Yeah.
That's the kicker right there. Yeah. There's so much love involved in living.
Yeah.
And we've got to be prepared to face that, to embrace it.
Yeah.
Because that's part of the experience. And if you miss it, you're missing so very much. Saley, thank you for joining us. My best to your mother as well. And we hope, that you'll come back. Maybe you would like to have a topic that you would like to hear. And folks, you're the same. If you would like us to cover a topic, please email me. Address is on the website, talktherapy.tmhs.com. That's Talk Therapy, the mental health show. And we'd love to hear from you. But Saley, stay in touch with us. You're a gracious young lady, and just absolutely a joy to talk to you, and I appreciate that.
Yes, well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, don't forget, you can find Saley part-time in Hamilton's. Yep. Yeah, I think that's terrific. You may have, quite by accident, you may have found a career choice right there. Good job out of you, Saley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, there she goes. Saley Sims, obviously an employee for life now by Hamilton.
Yeah.
She will be going to college on behalf of Hamilton's. And, is there some kind of a like a Pell Grant?
There should be. Interesting you say that. Real quick. So Mr. Hamilton that started Hamilton's Funeral Home, he had a gentleman work for him named Artis Peterson. And he was in high school, had a death in the family, ended up working for Mr. Hamilton. He sent him to college. And so he could come back and be a funeral director, and that's how we're still family owned.
There it is. All right. Well, Saley Sims was our guest there, but in the studio, we've been just absolutely overjoyed to have her back. Buffy Peters, Hamilton's Grief Academy. As we wrap up this show from the Five Talents Financial Management Studios, I want to thank Nick Learhoff for taking the day off so I could go one-on-one with Buffy. That's terrific. But on behalf of Danny Bishop and all of us at Hope 940, thank you for listening to this very special topic as we recognize and observe the National Children's Grief Awareness Month. For all of us, I'm Scott Casper. We'll talk to you next week on Talk Therapy, the mental health show, brought to you by our friends at St. Gregory's.